Okay, so looking back on 2021, no doubt DAZN, like any business in the world, had targets that you would hope to meet. How did the actual results compare with the targets that you made at the start of the year?
Well, I think as a group globally, which obviously extends well beyond boxing, and also in our boxing business, 2021 was a year of quite significant growth, and that was growth against ambitious targets which we met. I think 2021 was also a year for us of um, coming out of the pandemic in attack mode. 2020, for obvious reasons, we had to be somewhat tactical and react to the crisis that overcame the sports industry. 2021, by the time the year started, we were in a place where we could grow, and we did. We did aggressively. I think the boxing business is reflective of the rest of the group. To be honest, it's more markets, more shows, better shows, and ultimately a set of financials that we're very happy with and are in the healthiest place they've ever been. So a good year for us.
That's good to hear. Can you put some numbers, not necessarily on your financials? I don't want to go through all that, but in terms of subscribers and that sort of thing.
In a short answer, no, we don't put out our subscriber numbers publicly. But ultimately, exponential growth against where we were. I think the US business is getting stronger and stronger. We're better and better served by our promotional partners there in terms of quality and regularity of shows. That's reflected in our subscriber numbers, which have grown considerably and they're more loyal. Those subscribers month on
Yeah.
month, which is great. And the UK, obviously, we're just getting started. But with Canelo Billy Joe as a great start, and then the sort of fight camp launch and the launch of our relationship proper with Matchroom in the UK. I think Eddie would agree. We've had a really good first 5 or 6 months, and we're about to go into a very strong 2022 schedule too.
Focusing more on the boxing side, has it been difficult to retain and attract subscribers when there has been lulls in action, like we're experiencing at the moment?
Yeah, I think we're better at that though. I mean, we've been through, I hope, the lowest point of the pandemic from a, not that it was the biggest issue in the pandemic, full stop, but managing a subscription business with sport was very hard during the early days of COVID because no one knew when sport was coming back. I think the public and the subscriber knows now that although there may be no boxing in the month of January in the UK, they know, and we've announced content coming up, and I think that drives more loyalty. I think we're getting smarter with things like original programming. We're getting smarter with our marketing messaging. We're serving the customer with different kinds of value. So even if there is a forced lull on the schedule due to COVID in any given market, which I don't think will happen very often going forward, to be honest, I think we're doing a good enough job to retain the interest of the vast majority of those subscribers. And if they do step away, we're pretty efficient at winning them back when we do have content. So look, we're in a good spot. I think managing a boxing business is definitely different to the rest of our mostly football led or baseball in Japan led businesses. But we are increasingly adept at doing it. And as I say, the financials are in a very healthy spot.
Eddie, there's been some really good, really strong content that has come from Matchroom Media. Um, how is that, or how is your vision for that to evolve in 2022 and beyond?
I mean, we are at the forefront and continue to be at the forefront of shoulder programming, social content, promo content, um, levels above anybody else in the business in that respect. I think that from a show perspective, you've got two elements of Matchroom Media. Number one is from a live production perspective, which I think this is something that's a little bit underplayed by people in terms of its success. From to hit the ground running with a new production business and for a new broadcaster like DAZN, and to run that production so successfully from its launch, I think is something that's not talked about enough. Like the quality of our live production, to be able to go into fight fans, and boxing fans, without question, some of the most opinionated and often miserable fans in the sport, in sport in general, and to actually not receive criticism. You don't expect praise all the time, but to not receive criticism about the live production, about the commentary, about the analysis is so unique, because I've lived in a world where every show was full of criticism, and that's not a point to suggest that the previous production wasn't good, but the level of production that we are putting across, and also, I say to a lot of people, 5 months, really, 6 months is how long this project has been underway in the UK. And DAZN are very aggressive. Of course, everyone wants results as quickly as possible. We have basically turned the way that we have done things for the last 12 years on its head and done something completely different. And we've been doing it 6 months. The success of this project is remarkable. The first 6 months, honestly, couldn't have gone any better, other than White Walling taking place. That was a disappointment for us to lose that one fight. But other than that, of course, there's lots to improve on, and there's lots to keep, in terms of evolving. But the media side has been brilliant. We still need to work harder across the promotional side in terms of content and where that promotional content is placed during fight week, and building up to fights as well. And like I said, we're 6 months in to a 5-year deal, and it's been a tremendous start.
What, with your promoter's hat on, what has been the hardest thing in regards leaving Sky, and what has been the most refreshing thing leaving Sky?
The hardest thing is clearly you walk away from really a propaganda machine, if you like, of Sky Sports News, and that whole ability to sit on the platform with constant promotion of a fight. But the refreshing thing is the ability to work with different partners, across different fights, and DAZN's sort of freedom of thinking, of allowing that to happen. So Sky's mentality was always quite, this is a Sky show. We don't really want to be aligned with other platforms or outlets to push this fight. Yet with DAZN, we're able to sit across a BBC relationship, particularly with 5 Live and on digital, their relationship with joe.co.uk in the UK, many other outlets in the US, and those outlets and that infrastructure will continue to grow. So that, of course, we understand we lose in the interim and short term a little bit of promotional warfare power, if you like, across the platform while we start this project. But the freedom to work with promotional partners and outlets is very refreshing at the same time. The other refreshing element is the ability to make fights in markets whilst also benefiting in other markets because of this global product. Good example of that is Sandor Martin going and beating Mikey Garcia, is Kiko Martinez beating Kid Galahad. Would have been Jesse Vargas fighting Liam Smith. And probably the greatest example of that incoming, subject to it getting over the line, is Katie Taylor against Amanda Serrano, which is a pay-per-view in the UK normally, or would have been, because we talked about it for years and that was the plan. But instead, a fight that appeals heavily in the US, obviously as a standalone fight, and with Jake Paul's involvement, and resonates hugely in Britain and Ireland as well. So it's just, the refreshing part is the global element and looking at things very differently.
You say there about Taylor Serrano would have been pay-per-view in the UK. Obviously, those 3 evil words came out towards the end of last year, and it was in regard to DAZN as well. Are there still plans for that, or is it just about the right fight? And are you therefore saying that something like Taylor Serrano still wouldn't be a pay-per-view event on DAZN?
Well, Taylor Serrano, if it happens, and as you said, it's getting worked through, would not be a pay-per-view on DAZN. I think ultimately this conversation's about value. I don't think anyone in the US or the UK can question the value that we are bringing to the sport of boxing. I think we have dramatically course corrected that value component to consumers in the US, and we've offered over 4 years almost now an incredible roster of content at a far friendlier consumer price point. The reality is, in the sport of boxing, if you want to be operating in the major markets with the major players in those markets, let's take Anthony Joshua, who's a broadcast free agent at the moment. If we want to be in the mix for AJ fights, we have to be able to, because given that he's an established pay-per-view fighter, we have to be able to offer pay-per-view functionality if we want to be competitive for that for those fights. We do, because we believe that by acquiring those rights, if we do go after them, we'd be able to stitch those fans into a broader offering of boxing content. We need the pay-per-view to get into that game. So we are looking at it, but ultimately it comes down to value. And I think that the sort of foundational principles the business was founded on included value. It included a look at affordability. We've delivered that in every market we're in. And so if we do step into a pay-per-view world, we'll use it sparingly, and it will be centered around a broader commitment to consumer value that I don't think anyone can argue with, that we are living and breathing in every market we're in. So I don't think the word evil is fair to chuck in our direction when it comes to anything to do with consumer value. As and when we use it, it will be sparingly, as I said, and only because we need to use it to be competitive in the markets we're now in.
That's a fair comment. Eddie, Joe just mentioned Anthony Joshua there. Has there been discussions about, obviously there's ongoing discussions about Joshua's next fight, but has there been discussions about where Joshua's fight will appear for UK broadcasters, and whether that will be Sky Sports, DAZN or elsewhere?
Yeah, those conversations are ongoing, really. I mean, Joe made the point there. I think sometimes that whole sort of pay-per-view rumour mill fails to sort of recognise the common sense element of what Joe just said. To be competitive in a very small select number of fights, in my opinion, you need to have that functionality. It's not the basis of the model that we're working towards, but Anthony Joshua is the perfect example of that. He's a pay-per-view fighter. He'll always be a pay-per-view fighter. And right now he's a network free agent in the UK. So we've been having a number of conversations with Sky, with obviously DAZN and other broadcasters as well. Also, you have to think in AJ's position about the freedom to take certain fights and what aligning yourself exclusively with a broadcaster might mean in terms of the restrictions to doing that. Canelo Alvarez, the best example of that, someone that chose to be a network free agent consistently. But to be honest with you, it's a very dangerous game. And it's only a game I would play with probably 2 fighters in the world. Because, a good example, of course, is if AJ fights Tyson Fury and, a network deal would stop that fight from happening in some respect, then that's something that you have to look at. So I don't think we're in any tearing rush to do a UK TV deal with AJ until really we unearth the date of the next fight, the plan for the next fight and beyond. It's not like he's not going to have, multiple broadcasters and platforms queuing up to sign him, because he will. So, but obviously those conversations with DAZN are a lot more easier to have as well when they have the functionality of pay-per-view to say, yes, we have this model, and that's important for them to be able to offer to fighters internationally, I think, as well.
And I've got to ask, how close are we to hearing what Anthony Joshua will do next, when he'll do next, and who he'll be fighting? It seems to be a bit of a merry-go-round at the moment. You hear him one day. Being
honest, like I said yesterday in all the media, there's still people that would like to try and work out a solution for the quartet, if you like, to allow Fury to fight Usyk, and then AJ to have a fight, Dillian White to have a fight, and then AJ fights the winner. You know, and it's a very complicated procedure. That's why it's taken so long. But that goes quiet for a week, then it reemerges, then it comes back fiercely, then it might go quiet. So, you know, the talk over the last few days is because that's re-emerged, those talks and that potential. But right now, I mean, we have a purse bid in about 5 hours for Dillian White against Tyson Fury, which I will think will be postponed, but hasn't yet. So we're sort of sitting by looking at the phone and seeing what's going to happen. So I still think the favourite scenario is Fury against White and AJ against Usyk too, but also at the same time won't deny that there are talks ongoing to try and work out other scenarios.
But as Anthony Joshua's promoter, your preference remains Joshua Usyk too.
Depending on the deal, depending on the structure, you know, there's a lot to be said about, you know, AJ working with a new training team. You know, he goes away, he has this interim fight, and then he fights the winner of Fury against Usyk. Okay, now is that guaranteed? You know, is one of those guys going to sail into the sunset and we actually don't get our opportunity? How big's the money for that fight? You know, I mean, there's so much to consider. It's not about the step aside money. That's not the be all and end all in this scenario. It's about the plan. And right now, AJ has the clear shot to retain his world heavyweight titles. And no one can take that away from him. So to do something different has to be financially, you know, attractive, but it has to be extremely secure, solid, and smart. And if it's not all of those, we won't do it. So my preference is for AJ to take the route that makes most sense for his career. But right now, I know how difficult it is to get a shot at a championship, particularly a world heavyweight championship, and he has that shot in front of him. So that is obviously extremely attractive.
Last one on this, because I'm aware you've talked about this till you're blue in the face, almost probably quite literally. But you say that about Joshua not being able to get a title shot if he was to go a different avenue. Do you seriously believe that somebody of Anthony Joshua's status and stature, if he was to go off and score 1 or 2 impressive knockout wins, that he couldn't walk into a title shot as and when, purely due to his value?
Possibly, but also it's what that shot comes with, Matt. You know, I mean, some people won't want to give you the shot unless you know, there's a lot of carrots that they'll be putting in front of you, and some of those might not be beneficial to your career. So AJ's always been in control of his own destiny in boxing and in the business side of boxing, and that's how we'd like things to continue. He's not the champion at the moment, but he has a contract to challenge for the World Heavyweight Championship in a fight that he wants to take. So I'm not prepared to step aside with no plan and no guarantee of a way for him. All he wants to do is become World Heavyweight Champion again. Not bothered about someone giving him a little bit of money to go on holiday. You know? So that's it has to have a solid, unbreakable plan attached to it.
Fair enough. Just before I came on this call, I was writing something for Boxing News, and it was the top 20 fights that have already been confirmed for 2022. 8 of those 20 are matchroom fights, all excellent fights. You're obviously thinking more about kind of long-term planning. It's quite unusual to come into a new year and have almost like February, March already mapped out. You know better than anybody how chaotic it can be to try and plan fights. How difficult is it to look at the long game while also juggling what Anthony Joshua is going to do next, what Katie Taylor's going to do next, while also trying to build all of these other fights for the future? And how far ahead can you realistically plan?
Well, I think that February and March are really, it's a brilliant schedule and a brilliant start, but it's actually nothing compared to what will be announced for April and May, in my opinion. So the interesting thing is we've never announced an 8-fight schedule in advance. We've just never done it. I mean, if we do 2 or 3, it's, you know, but DAZN's model is very different. You know, they want to be able to say to subscribers, this is what we have planned across our schedule. And I like it, because actually it makes us more organized, you know, in terms of getting tickets on sale, you know, structuring, planning events around it. And I really like that model. The next move for Joe and Matchroom and his other partners is to be able to say, and here's April and May. And that's what we're working on at the moment. I won't put a time frame on that, but I don't know, a couple of weeks or whatever it's going to be. And that's Joe's next move, is to say, this is what we've coming on in April and May. Then you're going to go into February and go, wow, you've got February, March, April, May. This is the value that's being delivered for subscribers. You know, I mean, I don't want to go on too much about Thurman against Barros, but that's $75 in 2 weeks' time for one night of boxing, really one fight, even on that card. And, you know, you look at the value that DAZN are delivering, and when you can see that schedule as a subscriber, I feel I've never felt more love and loyalty from a fan than I do from DAZN subscribers, because they say UK and particularly America as well, because of how long we've been running over there now, this is unbelievable value. You know, and when you create that kind of loyalty between a customer, you know, loyalty is what's going to give you longevity from a subscriber. You know, someone that's invested in a platform, someone that actually is a believer in the product, someone that actually digests original content, you know, former fights, the library, you know, the analysis, the tutorials, all this kind of stuff. And you do that by looking at a schedule and getting excited. And that's what people have done for February and March. And now our plan is for April and May to come with something even stronger than those 2 months. And I love having a plan and a schedule in place that people can get excited about, because you can start to tell the story of those fights long before. You know, we announced Warrington against Kiko Martinez for 14 weeks before the fight. That's unheard of in boxing. It's quite difficult as well, but it's what, you know, it's what Joe and those guys want, and it is starting to work for us.
Yeah, I think it's a huge benefit for the sport. I think one of the most difficult things for fans and for the sport to progress is kind of that feeling that it's always kind of flying by the seat of its pants. And I think with some kind of structure in place, I think it's good news for everybody. But it's going to, if we're to believe recent reports, Joe, and reports that have been ongoing for quite some time, there's a buyout of BT Sport on the horizon. Is that as close as those reports suggest?
Listen, that's just speculation in the media, and we're not in the business of commenting on it. So I'm not going to comment on that.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so let's just to wrap this up regarding DAZN, and then Eddie, I've just got a couple of quick questions for you after that, if that's all right, and there won't be long ones. But just to wrap this up and to look back over the last 6 months, first of all, Joe, and if you can look at it from kind of what DAZN has achieved from a boxing content point of view, from the subscribers, etc., etc., what has been the biggest success and what has brought you the most pleasure from the last 6 months?
It's a really good question. I think it sounds really simple, but the effort on both our side and the promoter's side to get a multi-month schedule put together and announced it's no small feat. And it has, you said it, you know, many people have commented on it. It's not the norm in boxing. It's really important for our business that we do that, because it's really important for fans to give them that visibility. So getting, we sort of use like scuba diving analogy of like how far ahead we can see. And I think trying to get that visibility further and further away from ourselves is really important for us. So getting the spring schedule sorted, as Eddie said, our next move. That's been a big focus over the Christmas period. I think we've done a pretty good job, not a perfect job, but a pretty good job together of managing the UK and US schedule as well. And as Eddie said, considering it one global sort of environment, one ecosystem where fighters from the Matchroom global roster can take opportunities and making that work from a subscription mechanics perspective, but also from a fighter's perspective. That's really important. So I think that cohesion, it covers both those things. Just making sure all of that gets joined up is a full-time job, and we've executed that pretty well. So I'm excited by that. I think we're managing the boxing business better. Ultimately, I'm judged on the financial performance of the business, and that's in the best place it's been in for a long time. So all of that is an achievement, but I think all of it working better whilst we take on more makes me more excited for 2022 and beyond than I was 6 months ago. So that's a good thing too.
It's good to hear. And you, Eddie, what would you say has been the biggest success of Matchroom's marriage with DAZN over the last 6 months?
I think coming out of the pandemic and just creating consistently big events with also, I know this doesn't necessarily concern Joe, but with huge crowds. Yeah. You know, I mean, firstly, you had Fight Camp, you know, with fans back, which was a great effort to get that up and running. Then you had Josh Warrington in front of 20,000 at Headingley. You know, never had a major boxing event before at Headingley. Katie Taylor on the card, Conor Benn on the card. Then obviously, and I know it only went to, you know, it went to everywhere else globally, but not the UK. Anthony Joshua at Spurs, 70,000. You know, then you go into Derek Chisora. You know, sorry. Then you go into Liam Smith against Anthony Fowler. Brilliant domestic fight. 10,000 sellout in Liverpool. Then we go back to Liverpool with Conor Benn and do 7,000 there against Chris Algieri. You know, you do a brilliant card in Sheffield with two of the upsets of the year with Terry Harper and Kid Galahad. And then you box it off with 13,000 for a brilliant heavyweight fight with Chisora Parker. So it's not just been good, it's been unbelievable to put that together in the first 6 months. The one, you know, if we would have just had White Wile in, it would have been an absolute barnstormer. And, you know, but that's okay. I think Joe's been working in boxing long enough now. Joe's actually, I'm starting to give Joe bad news sometimes, and he's not even really panicking or moaning. He's just going, oh. He actually said to me the other day, something like, that's boxing. And I thought, blimey, you got that quickly, because it must be very frustrating for, it was. I remember sometimes you give Joe some bad news about a fight falling through, and he would get like, he'd be like, I can't believe this boxing's a joke. And that's how it is for the first few years. I was like that myself. And in the end, it's standard. So, and it's how you react. And actually, not just saying it, but DAZN have become very good at reacting, coming up with other scenarios. Like, for example, and you asked me what was one of the most pleasing things of last year. It was probably for them to allow the women's unification to proceed when White Wile fell off. And it was them backing us and backing the sport and women's sport. And that night to say, okay, we were doing White there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to run that show. You know, we're also going to do Ben Algieri and Katie Taylor double header in Liverpool. Then we've got Chisora Parker over that. So you have to be very versatile in this business. And they've become better at being reactive and also digesting bad news better and saying, okay, no problem. That's horrible. We hate that, but on we go. And that's Joe, you know, Joe's obviously living and breathing that every day. And you just become numb to it, really, in the end.
Yes, it's gradual erosion of your soul.
Yeah. Wait till you've been in it for about 20 years and then see what's left of you.
We'll see, yeah.
I see that amazing Barney he's got now. Like, going a bit like mine at the front, so he's in trouble.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks so much for that. Eddie, just a couple of questions for you now, if that's all right, kind of on more boxing-related matters. One was yesterday's news, or it might have even been the day before when it came through, in regards to the WBC and their clean boxing programme. Conor Benn, Chris Billam-Smith, two Matchroom fighters, taking out the WBC rankings. From your point of view, what's the explanation on that?
Poor admin, and just not really understanding that, you know, it's quite important to do. I think there was 4 or 5 British fighters on there, Lee McGregor and others as well.
Yeah.
Those forms got sent to Conor Benn's management, and I just don't think he ever filled them out because they're quite arduous, the forms. They will be filled out. I think they've actually already been done, and they will be sent straight back to the WBC. Conor Benn is part of the 365-day-a-year UCAD program with the British Boxing Board of Control, which is much more frequent, much more arduous a testing program than the WBC. So it's, you know, and same with Chris Billam-Smith, the gentleman, you know, actually quite surprised that he didn't do it because he's quite efficient.
That's exactly what I thought.
So, but they'll all get them done and they'll be straight back in the rankings. But it's, you know, it's a good system, that WBC system, but at the same time, it's not very frequent in terms of testing. I reckon I've got 100 fighters signed to that. I'm not sure you could say 10% have ever been tested by the WBC. That's
interesting. That's interesting. I mean,
it's still great. It's, you know, no one else is doing it, so it's a fantastic program. Just want to get that clear before Maurizio calls me and has a go at me for saying something that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the question was designed to clear names as opposed to muddy them. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think clear names because they're already enrolled in a much more, you know, as I said, arduous and frequent testing program, and also clear the names because they'll have it in by the end of the week and they'll be straight in the ranking. So it's not the first time this has happened. It's happened to a dozen other fighters that didn't fill out the form and then filled out the form. So.
The last question is in relation to a conversation we had 1 year ago. And it's all right, I'm not about to say you said this and then you didn't do it. But 1 year ago, we were talking about, it was February, it was at the Matchroom office, snow was outside, and we started talking about the sanctioning bodies. And you know Boxing News' feelings on the sanctioning bodies as they currently stand. But you said something along the lines of, in years to come, we might be in a position to say we don't need the sanctioning bodies, but we're not there yet. Are you any closer as probably the most influential promoter in the world of making a stand against the sanctioning bodies, particularly in light of some of the recent fights and things that are going on?
One of the major issues is that, you know, and I don't have a problem with the governing bodies. I don't agree with half of what they do, but it's also, I will say one thing, it's a very difficult job they have when you've got promoters like me and like Heyman and like Top Rank and everybody else who are consistently pushing agendas of fighters. You have to let some people down. You have to make bad decisions. But anyway, fighters want to win world championship belts, right? So you can't underestimate the power of those brands, if you like, of the WBC and other championships as well. Because if you created a different organization or a different belt, you know, with the UFC belt is everything to an MMA fighter, but there was never anything before that belt that carried history and legacy that replaced it, that the UFC belt replaced. Whereas if you came out in boxing and said, right, we're going to create the Matchroom World Championship, right? I mean, PBC talked about doing it for a while, and I'm sure that was well on the agenda. Does a fighter want to win a Matchroom or a PBC championship belt? The answer is no. They want to win a WBC belt. They want to win a Ring Magazine belt. They want to win an IBF belt because they saw their heroes lift those belts when they fell in love with the sport. So I do agree, you know, I do understand that at some point you make that jump and in 5 years' time, everyone wants to win a Matchroom belt or a PBC belt. Do you know what I mean? But I don't think now is the time. I think now is the time to get together with the governing bodies and the promotional companies and say, let's have almost like a summit of what is and what isn't the problems. Because, you know, Joe, as much as he understands boxing now, like broadcasters become so frustrated with like, oh, we can't do that fight because he's got a mandatory. It's like, what? Like, we're putting the money up. You know, Joe's putting the money up, DAZN are putting the money up for these fights, but yet they can't get the fight they want because he's got a fight, this mandatory, it's actually a fight we don't want. So the broadcasters have to be understanding of the politics and the system of the sport of boxing, but they would much rather, you know, they're much more likely to keep investing in the sport if they can get the fights they want to get. And
it comes down to our investment will come and keep coming if there is public interest. And I think the ultimate problem, which boils down to, is the public will lose interest. I mean, I watched Rob Tebbett did that 2022 boxing podcast the other day. And there was 4. I mean, you couldn't get more boxing people. It was one of our talent team, Addy, a few other people, 4 boxing experts, and they were getting themselves confused about who had which belts. You can't imagine like Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher forgetting who were the current holders of the Champions League. You know, it's so complicated that the experts in the sport sometimes get themselves confused, and that's just because there's just so many different ways that the belts have been cut, and different types of champion and different governing bodies. For me, ultimately, it comes down to a messaging problem to the public. The public need to understand why something matters, and then they'll come and watch it. And it's one of the reasons potentially boxing's got in its own way. So I think a summit's a really good idea, because ultimately the sport needs to stop harming itself by confusing its fan base and by overcomplicating itself. For me, I think it's a really important conversation, because Eddie's right that if the public lose interest because they're confused, or the relevance of a fight is just diluted by several other similar fights that are called similar things by different or similarly named governing bodies, then why would Joe Bloggs on the street, the casual sports fan, want to watch it? I just think you need to simplify it, and it's a massively complicated problem to resolve. But a summit where all this stuff can get aired would be a really good idea.
I think sometimes as well, obviously, we're 3 people that are very close to boxing. Like, if you looked at a fight like Joshua against Fury, right, and you spoke to everyone that was interested in that fight, like, if it wasn't for the undisputed heavyweight world championship, 95% of those people would not give a shit.
Correct.
You know what I mean?
They don't even really understand what undisputed means. They just think the 2 best boxers in the world having a fight.
Therefore, we shouldn't care as much as we do, but we're also boxing fans and hardcore fans, and so are the fighters, which mean that belts matter, But people just are more concerned about the fight and the narrative and the build-up and the dynamic of that fight. Yeah, I mean, Brooke Khan's quite a good example. 2 blokes that are finished. No world title on the line, not even close. Yet it's still a big fight, because the public know Amir Khan, they know Kelbert. Oh, yeah, I remember that fight. It was going to happen once. Oh, I'll tune in. Hey, Bellion. Another example. No heavyweight world title. One of the biggest pay-per-views we've ever done. So sometimes we're a bit too close to it,
Yeah, completely. I think it's kind of so ingrained in our consciousness that this is the way it works that we almost feel like there's no way out of it. But I think the biggest thing for me is if you kind of look at the way the sanctioning bodies work, the fact that, okay, we have seen probably over the last 12 to 18 months kind of more of a coming together than I have known since there's been 4 sanctioning bodies, and more of a willingness to work together. But when you're trying to explain to Joe Bloggs on the public, out in the public eye, about how these rankings work, and you only have to look at the heavyweight rankings, where you have got Alexander Usyk, who will not appear in the WBC rankings. You have got Tyson Fury, who will not appear in the other rankings because he holds another title. People like Joe Joyce won't be ranked because he holds a lofty position with the other. It's all so nonsensical that for your long-term goal and aim of attracting new fans to it, I think this is a massive obstacle. And I do look from the outside in as much as I possibly do, rather than kind of
sport more generally, right? Is going to face an absolute. It's a major challenge. The younger generation, who are Eddie's kids' age, young teenagers, kids maybe 3 or 4 years older than that, who are going to, in 5 or 6 years, start becoming the credit card in the household. They're going to have their own property. They're going to be making the decisions on behalf of the households they live. These people have got so many different entertainment options, and they've been served to them since they were 3 years old on various screens. Sport needs to package itself and remember that it's an entertainment format amongst a plethora of entertainment options. If you make your sport or your offer overly complicated and so confusing and ultimately hard to understand, I'm not sure about boxing, but about sport more generally, these kids are going to say, well, I'm confused by that. I'll watch something else. I don't understand why I'd watch that. Why would I give my limited amount of time to that? I'd give it, and they've got, sport, music, entertainment, celebrity. There's so many different things they can spend their time doing, far more options than when I was a kid 20 years ago. So if we don't correct this stuff, the sport faces a major problem that it will just lose audience. And then you're into a different issue where the interest in the sport more generally starts to die. So it needs attention. It needs attention quickly, because it's ultimately about protecting the health of the sport.
Download on Thursday morning via iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, and most of the usual platforms.